Well, folks, more balance changes are on the way, confirmed today by Alec Dawson here on Twitter, lead designer for Hearthstone. August 31st, 2 Warlock changes are coming. He writes, upping mana and feels focused. Now, there's 2 interpretations for that. That could mean like both cards are getting their mana cost upped and they're being changed because of how they feel. Another possible interpretation is that maybe one is getting its mana cost changed and the other one is getting changed somehow based on its feels. I'm leaning towards that first interpretation here, that they're probably both going to be mana cost changes, but I do want to theorize some possible fixes in this video, and I do accommodate both of those interpretations. Also, a little bit of a schedule here moving forward for balance changes. Going to monitor and evaluate the meta for the 10 days, I guess, following those 2 Warlock changes hitting next week, and then decide if additional changes are needed. I think it's really cool here to get a tease for a bit of a schedule for balance changes. So that said, let's talk about some potential changes we could see. And this first one, boy, it's a doozy. I don't think this is remotely likely, and I wouldn't recommend this change, but it's one I've seen floating around among the community, so I definitely wanted to acknowledge it and discuss it. This is a change to the quest reward for the Demonseed. What if you change Blightborn Tamzin so that she damages both players instead of exclusively damaging your opponent when you take damage? So in other words, you still take the hits like normal, but you also deal that damage to your opponent. So you'd have to basically mitigate this with additional healing, additional life gain to ensure that you could stay alive before or long enough that you could kill your opponent, because you're taking matched damage outputs, of course. So you need to be at a higher health total than them. And this could, of course, encourage a couple things, like it might reshift the deck more towards aggressive game plans so that they soften up their opponent and use this as a finisher, because they probably can't rely on blowing up all at once, kind of ignoring everything in the process and then just winning instantly. And of course, they'd just be way easier to kill because they'd be taking a ton of extra damage if they didn't kill you in a single turn. Or if you put them at low health totals, they just have to have a ton of healing to get over the hump and stay alive. So all in all, I think it'd be too hard to make anything work with a change like this one. I think some people just want to totally kill Quest Warlock because they're sick of it. And a change like this would probably achieve that goal. I think it would totally kill the deck. But I don't think this is likely because it would take a coding and mechanics change from the Hearthstone team. I think it's just too much as well, and kind of maybe steals the spirit of the card a little on top of all that. So this, I think, is a more likely change. It's not mana focused, as was teased in the tweet, but if this is a feels change, I think this is a possibility if they want to go right at the Demonseed. And it's a subtle one, but what if you removed the life steal from the mini rewards along the way? So right now it reads life steal, deal 3 damage to the enemy hero. This would have basically removed just a little bit of healing that the Warlock gets for free by completing their quest, would retain the chip damage they get to do to soften up opponents for those eventual lethals, but it would put them at greater risk so that aggro decks could essentially race them down a little bit harder. And, they'd still have that end game win state against control. So, in some ways, you'd have to rely on aggro decks really racing them down, lowering the play rate of this deck so the control has a little bit more room in the meta to come in and counter those aggro decks. As long as Warlock is kept in check, even if you don't change the way it plays and the way it wins, you still, create opportunities in the meta for other decks to thrive and find some room for themselves. So you still kind of solve the problem in some ways, even if you don't. Now, that said, I don't actually think the Demonseed is going to get changed. I think this is one of the likely changes we're going to see from Blizzard. They talked about feels, and most people are complaining about the feel of Stealer of Souls. Now, interestingly, when you look at the 3 major versions of Quest Warlock in standard format right now, there is a hand-locky kind of version. I don't know what to call it, but it runs Goldshire Knoll and a Netheron, and it's the best from a win rate standpoint, and it's more of kind of a control fatigue game plan as opposed to the Stealer of Souls version, which is more of what I would call like a miracle deck, where you're looking for 1 or 2 really big pop-off turns with Stealer of Souls and often Dark Glare on board, where you just go crazy and draw a bunch of cards and hit your opponent really, really hard all at once. There's a third version that's more of a zoo-style version that plays more aggressively and for the board, essentially, and has just like some burst damage on top of that to follow it up. Now, The best version is not the version people complain about the most. People complain about Stealer of Souls the most. It's the card that's kind of the most dramatic and often feels the worst because you're watching your opponent play like 10 cards and it's just like, ugh, let this end already. So if Blizzard is not focused on win rate, but instead focused on feels, like was teased in the tweet, Stealer of Souls is certainly a prime candidate for that change. An easy fix there might be pushing it to 6 mana. Another change I thought was possible is that the effect only goes off once per turn. This is a suggestion I've seen a lot of people make that I think is really reasonable. This would still protect the card like Spirit or Soul so that you could still play this like outside of Quest Warlock and still use it to like cheat out a 10-drop or something, right? That's a fun way to play this, is kind of a big style, cheat style deck. We had some fun with Stealer of Souls in the past doing that. If you made this change, you could still make those sorts of big plays without enabling the absurd pop-off turns. So I do think this is a pretty elegant way to fix it. That said, it's a mechanic change, it's a code change, probably more work for Blizzard. So I think this change to 6 mana, maybe just 5, but we've seen them go to 4 to 6 in the past. Whatever the case, a mana bump to Stealer of Souls is probably the more likely outcome, I think, as far as what Blizzard is likely to do, although I certainly wouldn't mind seeing this change as well. Now, moving on, there's 2 other cards I think are maybe even more likely than Stealer of Souls or Demonseed to get nerfed. The first of which is Backfire. I don't see people complaining about this a lot, but when you look at the win rates for Quest Warlocks right now, Backfire is insane. It's really, really good in the best version of the deck, the more handlocky style, the card draw style, because it's card draw. It fills your hand for those Goldshire Knolls and all these other cards while still happily progressing your quest and triggering your Ruined Mithril Rod, all these other great plays. And then it's also good in the late game too, like after you've played Tamzin. If you're in Fatigue in particular because Soul Rend has destroyed your deck, Backfire can blow up for some big damage output. And on top of that, this card's also played in the wild version of the deck, whereas Stealer of Souls is not. So this would have a kind of cascading effect to wild format as well. So I think pushing Backfire to 4 mana, slowing it down just a little, would go a long way. Now at 4 mana, it does still stay on curve with Ruined Mithril Rod at 3. So you might say, it's not that big of a pain. But, you know, if you spend 2 turns, you Rod, and then you Backfire, and you're not reacting to the board at all, that's going to give decks a lot more window to really push you in the mid game, where you're probably most susceptible to taking pretty significant chunks of damage. So, you know, it adds up. It's those small incremental changes that are enough. And the deck's win rate right now is not obscene. It's good if you look from Diamond to Legend. Quest Warlock is currently the 3rd best deck in the meta, but it's in a healthy spot. It's not like crazy high win rates or anything. So small changes are probably still enough. Once we've already gotten 2 changes that maybe didn't do enough, the next 1 or 2 will probably be sufficient to put Quest Warlock in a spot where people don't feel so oppressed by the deck. Now, on top of Backfire, I tease this guy. I think Ruined Mithril Rod is another potential change. Another card with ridiculous mulligan win rates for Quest Warlock decks. It's just so many discounts, right? When your hand is full and this goes off, it's just obscene. It's multiple Emperor Thaurissan ticks. It's absolutely crazy. Pushing it to 4 mana would make it a much bigger commitment. You know, that's another important turn. Your opponent hits you really hard, makes breakpoints tougher to stay alive at. So you know how it is. Mana reductions in Hearthstone always go crazy. They keep breaking things. And of course, this is a huge mana reduction card. So one, I think a lot of people would probably be happy to see get the nerf bat here. Maybe it needs to be the Ruined Nerf Rod instead of the Ruined Mithril Rod. All right, so there you go. That wraps it up for the nerfs. What do you think about these? Good changes, bad changes? Which ones would you like to see? Which ones would you hate? Are there other cards you think need changes instead? Maybe these aren't even the right cards as far as you're concerned. Maybe Flesh Giant still needs to go to 30 mana to make you happy. I don't know. I want to hear those thoughts and more, though, in the comments below. Stay tuned to next week. Sounds like we got some crazy news coming. Nerfs, mercenary stuff. I'm still expecting some Battlegrounds news and updates as well. So it's going to be a big week next week for news. So I'll be busy. I'll see you all there with lots and lots of updates, hopefully, for cool stuff coming to Hearthstone. That said, thanks so much as always for watching. And until next time, game on.